Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren,
Ladies and gentlemen,
darf Sie wieder bitten, Platz zu nehmen.
I may ask you to take your seats. We are starting our second session on the topic of investment, innovation and education as drivers for a more competitive Europe. At the beginning, I have to tell you that Wilhelm Molterer, the managing director of EFSI, unfortunately cannot be with us today because of a death in the family. But the deputy managing director of EFSI, Mrs. Iljana Canova, has agreed to step in for him. Welcome, Ms. Canova. I'm also happy to see the co-chair, Mrs. Margarida Marques. Welcome, madam. Thank you very much. And the Mr. Niels Torvald, member of the European Parliament. Welcome to you, sir. Now, without further ado, I'd ask Mrs. Canova to take the floor.
Hello? Is that thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, members of Parliament, good afternoon. I'm really happy to be here with you today and discuss a topic which is very close to my heart, the topic of investment, innovation, and education to drive a more competitive Europe. So I will share a few thoughts with you on that subject and share also some of our achievements at the European Fund and Strategic Investments. As the Mr. Chairman mentioned, I'm the Deputy Managing Director of the European Fund for Strategic Investment, which you also may know as the Juncker Plan or EFSI. And the objective of this important initiative was to narrow market gap in Europe in the post-crisis period. How do we do it? The European Investment Bank Group, which is a key partner to this initiative, together with the European Commission, has committed to invest 100 billion euro investments in the EU economy on top of their normal lending activity. The main objective is that we also stimulate additional investments into the EU economy. We are never alone when we invest. So the objective is to mobilize private sector capital for projects that have a high impact on the economy in the areas of research and innovation, improve access to finance for SMEs, infrastructure, development of human capital. What is important to mention is that the backbone of this initiative is a public sector guarantee from the EU budget with the amount of 26 billion euro. The bottom line is that the EU public support has been absolutely essential in sustaining risk capital financing across the Union, especially in the years after the crisis. Where we are today with EFSI implementation, we have managed to mobilize 335 billion euro in total investments, exceeding, by the way, the regional target of 315 billion. We have supported close to 700 small and medium enterprises. We have looked at more than 900 projects. And what is more important, we ensure that we have invested in all 28 member states, and we have covered all the priority sectors set in the regulation by the European Parliament, with 32% of the total investment targeting research, development, and digitalization. I mean, I can talk a lot about what we have achieved. We are one of the largest investors in private equity. And what is important to us is to crowd in more capital so that we can support the European entrepreneurs and the European companies and give them the financial backing they need. I'm sure we can talk more about our achievements, the lessons learned, challenges, but what I really wanted to share with you now is what are the challenges that the European is facing to become a global innovation hub. This is at least from our experience. And I mean, we all know that we don't have shortage of innovative ideas or great minds or entrepreneurship spirit in Europe. But certainly what is happening is that the EU companies, the new companies, they don't really, most of them make it beyond the startup phase, or they actually move their business outside Europe to find a better market to grow. And I think that there are three key reasons for this, and I call it the three Fs. It's very easy to remember. It's funding, it's fragmentation, and a frame of mind. Talking about funding, I think what we can definitely observe is that there are some really positive developments observed in recent years, especially when we talk about risk capital. But we still have a long way to go before we are able to support a European company from all stages of its development, from a very early stage to a growth stage. And what we can also say is that we have been traditionally relying on bank lending, which unfortunately is not well suited when we talk about financing innovation, especially deep tech, when we're talking about supporting companies that are really involved in the intangible economy, and then they're not really having the assets that the banks need as collateral. So what we need is to really come up with products that are more suited to support innovation, like venture capital. But even that, in Europe, it's too small, it's too fragmented, and it's lacking critical mass. And there are two gaps that I would like to mention. The first gap is particularly high at the earliest stages of the business development, when great ideas need to make their leap from university labs to commercialization. And I don't really like to compare ourselves to the US, but if we look at US as an example, investments on early and seed stage were 9 times higher compared to Europe, 9 times higher. Then the second trap that the companies face is the growth stage trap. And this is the period where the companies need the financing to scale up, to broaden their outreach, to go global. And so often they fail to find this financing in Europe. Again, looking at the US, more than 20 times of this product is spent on later stage investments, 35 billion compared to the EU of 1.6 billion. We have estimated that the European investment gap in innovation and digitalization until 2030 is substantial. It's actually estimated of euro 160 billion annually for breakthrough innovation and big tech. And the EU issue for us, I think it's twofold. The first one is to rapidly really catch up technologically with frontier firms. And the second is to foster radical breakthrough so that we can become leaders where we have competitive advantage. The bottom line is that we can't really afford the European businesses to leave Europe and seek financing where it is more readily available. We need to develop the products in Europe. The second topic, this is the topic of fragmentation. And I mean, we can talk a lot about fragmentation of the European markets, but what we have at the end of the day is, different rules and regulations, different taxation scheme, different standards across 28 member states, even different languages. I mean, clearly this hampers cross-border investments, and it also hampers cross-border expansion of successful businesses. And the last point I would like to mention is, of course, the frame of mind, and a lot can be said about the European frame of mind towards risk-taking on many levels, but I'll mention two. First, what we have observed is that the European established businesses, the European large corporates, are very hesitant to buy new products from young companies. And if we look at statistics again, the EU companies spend less on innovation than their competitors in other parts of the world, 1.3% of GDP compared to 1.6% in China, 2% in the US, and 2.6% in Japan. At the level of the traditional investors, what we also see is that the venture capital firms, fear new and complex technologies and untested market. And as I said, we still rely heavily on bank lending, which is not the right product when we want to finance innovation. Therefore, over time, we need to overcome dependence on bank lending and offer the products that the businesses need so that they grow. But ladies and gentlemen, I think that there are also very good news that I would like to share. And the thing is, we are moving in the right direction, and we have worked with many of you, and we are already seeing the impact. First of all, the European venture capital has grown threefold over the past 5 years, from 5 billion to 18 billion euro. And at the same time, the EU-backed financial instruments with public funding, like EFSI, like Innofin, which is funded from Horizon 2020, has totally transformed innovation finance in Europe. I mean, seriously, the difference that we see in the past 3 years is substantial. Especially at EIB, we are the EU bank that is one of the biggest investors in, not one of the biggest, we are the biggest investor in the innovation. Our lending to innovation has doubled in size, and now we are looking at projects which are smaller in size. So we are reaching more and more companies. Public finance has been, and I think it will remain, a key funding source for basic research and backing private risk capital in Europe, just like EFSE that I work for. And what we have seen now in the EU proposal for the next budget, that we are seeing a 50% increase in the budget for Horizon Europe. We also see a new program of 9.2 billion for Digital Europe, focusing on digital skills, cybersecurity, high-performance computing, and artificial intelligence. And there is a proposal for a budget guarantee of 38 billion euro for risk capital under InvestEU fund. This is the successor in EFSI. And I think the bottom line is, of course, this will all be debated in the next months, but this just shows how important innovation is for Europe. On the policy side, because investment is important, but unless we actually have the right framework in place, we will never be able to achieve the excellence you're aiming for, and the policy side is very important. I think that the EU strategy for capital markets union, to break dependence on bank lending, for example, digital single market, aim at addressing many of the challenges related to fragmentation of the European digital market. However, the national governments are also on the lead to implement the reforms and to reduce red tape to allow rapid advances in the digital economy in their countries. Investment in education and people skills is a top priority. I mean, without human capital development, starting with early stage education to lifelong learning and upgrading of skills will remain a key topic for every government. And as I said, the frame of mind, I mean, it doesn't change overnight, but the bottom line is that technological development and digitalization change the way we live. They are the economy. Change the way we work, change the way we shop, change the way we communicate. We have no choice but to embrace those challenges, otherwise we will just fall behind. As a cornerstone institutional investors, we have been making every effort to support innovation in Europe, and I will be very happy to hear your ideas and your vision on how we can do better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tanova. Before giving the floor to Mr. Torvalds, I would like to point out that if you would like to take the floor, please submit the request to the information desk at the back of the room. Mr. Torvalds. Thank you very much. Of course, it would have been very nice if I were able to speak German, but that's not the case. I'm sorry.
Then I would like to start with one comment and a warning. I'm the second Niels on the panels today. The first Niels was a very nice gentleman. You probably noted that he said that I'm skipping this slide because it's too complicated. He didn't say because he's a nice man, it's too complicated for politicians. Thank you. My warning is that even if I have a nice first name as Professor Tygesen, I'm still mentally a mischievous schoolboy. And now to the text. There are, of course, hundreds of different takes on the challenges we have to face due to the ongoing globalized competition. One way of answering was the EFSI. I was shadowing FC1 and FC2, and I'm now shadowing the InvestEU. This has forced me to slightly broaden the terms that we usually do in the Parliament, where different aspects of a single issue are divided according to formal rules of competence, and the committee where some of the aspects of these issues are discussed and voted. After some hesitation, I have chosen one word to describe the multitude of challenges we face, modernization. At the same time, I of course have to flag up that modernization is not a universally accepted approach, and different theories about modernization are looking for answers all over the place. Therefore, I divide modernization in three distinctly different waves. The first starts during the end of the 19th century. If you need a slightly ironic year, 1887 could be fine. That's the year when the British Merchandise Marks Act went into force, forcing Germans to produce and to mark their second-rate products with the warning label "Made in Germany." This is the beginning of the long 20th century, and you could, for good reason, argue that the first wave of modernization ends in chaos of World War II. This definition points to a number of different fields of human activity where Joseph Schumpeter's, from Vienna, of course, creative destruction comes to force. This creative destruction is not in this sense just something functioning in the spheres of economy. You could actually use literature to expose this destruction going on through Marcel Proust, à la recherche du temps perdu, or Robert Musil's Der Mann ohne Eigenschaften, or the Joyce Ulysses, or Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. And being in Vienna, I think you should show some taste to add Fritz Werfel to the list of this for his 40 Tage des Muse da. Why this literary introduction? It's not just that I'm the son of a poet and a literary critic. I'm very much afraid that we in politics almost by default take very narrow and narrow-minded approaches to the challenges of our times. And it's not just politicians who take a narrow approach. It goes for economists as well. The failure of the first wave is leading up to the climatic disaster. That is probably why Karl Polanyi is trying to get across in his great transformation. The second wave of modernization starts after World War II. I won't go into the details of the second wave of modernization. There is actually a very good description of the second wave of modernization in Gabriele Metzler's Konzeption politischen Handels von Adenauer bis Brandt. And if you need some literary hints, I could start by mentioning Norman Mailer's The Naked and the Dead. I could continue with Alexander Solzhenitsyn's A Day in Life of Ivan Denisovich, and then Ivana Denisovich, go on to Truman Capote in Cold Blood, Milan Kunderas' The Unbearable Lightness of Being, Salman Rushdie's The Satanic Verses, and Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. The second wave is characterized by the Cold War and the competition between the First and the Second World, by decolonization and democratization. Third, the developed civil society. 4, the welfare society. 5, individualization. 6, human rights. And 7, a belief in progress going on forever. And when we were in the middle of this idle world where everything sort of seemed to be going well, the third wave hit us. We can start with individualization. And there is probably a developing conflict between the social institutions and the self-governing individual. This conflict can be seen daily in the relations between political parties and the citizens. Globalization doesn't probably in this respect need very much explanation for you. We know that it's coming over us all over the place, and we are struggling to keep up. The digital revolution and an enormous increase of productivity is leading to a growing competition between leading markets, Europe, US, China, emerging markets, in a political sense, Russia, and the regions inside the national states. And when we meet all these challenges, there is a tendency, and there is a very nice German word, Flucht nach vorne, escaping forward, due to the illusion of perpetual progress and misuse of Keynesian deficit financing, resulting in very large public and private debts. And everybody is doing it, but in very different ways. China is escaping forwards, not paying enough attention to the environment. The United States is escaping forwards with a man who is twittering all over the place without very much sense for the results. And the EU member states are escaping forwards in acting in a Margaret Thatcherite way. They say, actually, I want my money back. I don't know if they have the handbag with them, but they are always saying, I want my money back, without seeing the need for acting and doing together. At the same time, when globalization hits us and the third wave hits us, there is an immense need for Europe to overcome the division between West and, to use Milan Kundera's word, the kidnapped Central Europe. And here we can again see that we were over-optimistic. If we go back to the literature from the beginning of, immediately after the fall of the Berlin Wall, you see that very intelligent persons like Janos Kornai said that we're going to fix this in 10 years. That was a broad misconception of how easily this could be done. And now we see the backlash. And the backlash is coming at the same time when we are overrun by the refugee crisis. We still are trying to face the challenges of the future, building a united Europe around the euro. I'm coming back to that. And we have, and that's for me very disturbing, we are large parts of Europe actually establishing lagging regions. I don't think we really understand in how many different directions we are going these days. But there is a study from the Commission about lagging regions, and I think the most dramatic case in that study is the northeastern corner of Romania. We are speaking about artificial intelligence at the same time when people are going to schools not actually up to where we should be. So we are speaking about investments, innovations, and education. But we don't do what we should do. First of all, there is a tendency that we always putting all the blame on the euro. I think I have at least one shelf meter of Eurocritic books. The more I read of them, the less convinced I get that they have got the things right. Why? Why? Well, if the same scholars had written as critically about national currencies, the discussion wouldn't be that skewed. And just as a footnote here, Niels Stuygesson has actually written, I think, in the 1970s, a book about small countries and their currencies. Most of those who are now writing about the euro has never read that book, even if you could find it now on Amazon, very cheap, 10 euros. There is no alternative to become more productive. But if you look at the report, Economic Challenges of the Lagging Regions, you'll see that we have regions all over Europe that are not able to compete in a global and highly technological world. And if we don't take note of this, we're going to have increasing amount of problems in Europe, because those regions are not going to take it easily. Second, the EU budget. We are now in the process of scrutinizing the MFF. In the Budget Committee, I'm rapporteur for Horizon Europe, and I noted when we went through the papers that the Commission is doing what it always do, it skews the numbers there. We had a good presentation of the EFSI, but do you remember from where the money came? They actually took it out of the budget and they cut something else. So there is no new money, actually, or very small amounts of new money in the EFSI. And that's, again, going back to the Thatcherite, I want my money back. The member states won't give up their petty budgets, and they don't give up their totally almost insane thoughts that they can fix the globalized problems with their national budgets. That's not true. One of the interesting features of Horizon 2020 program was that many more applications that could be accepted were labeled excellent. So we have a lot of excellent things going on in research in Europe. What's happening with those programs? Are the member states able to get some money for those excellent programs? If they don't, then we won't fix the gap, innovation gap. And if you look at what's going on in the United States, some of you might be thinking that Donald Trump is here for probably just 2 more years. But if you look at the investments in the States, 60% of the investments, 70% of the investments in the United States goes to California. 20% goes to the East Coast. About 5 to 10% goes to the rest. They are lagging behind, and because they are lagging behind economically and intellectually because of a failing educational system, they are going to vote for Donald Trump once more. So we need a real European budget. I think Niels Stuyvesant said it in the very end of his speech. We need a budget of between 3 and 5%, then we can fix it. But you are the responsible ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Torvalds. I'd now like to hand over to my co-chair, Margarida Marquez. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the invitation to act as co-chair at this session. And we have the privilege of sharing this discussion on investment, innovation, and education, both excellent statements. There is consensus in the European Union that investment, innovation, and education are driving forces of a more competitive Europe. I think around these concepts there is general consensus at European level. The Lamy report was quoted earlier. It's an interesting reading matter on these topics. However, we have to see how this consensus develops within the framework of the multi-annual financial framework. It's not enough to have principles when it comes to discussing tools and instruments. One also has to include the financial problem. Within the framework of the MFF, and Horizon 2020, that is the new program, has to be taken into consideration. There will be a strengthened budget, an enlarged budget, which is a good thing. It shows that in order to promote investments and innovation, this is necessary, but it also we also have to make sure that there is a regional balance. We have to make sure that all member states and all regions have access under the same conditions to Horizon Europe. Yes, the rules are the same for all member states, but when we look at the figures of the current program, Horizon 2020, there is no such a balance, and therefore we have to make sure that there will be a well-balanced situation in the next Horizon 2020 program. This also applies to the European Innovation Council. It's a very interesting idea, an idea to be supported, but this Innovation Council has to represent added value relative to the current, already existing Innovation Council. The creation of a new Innovation Council has to represent added value. There is also the Erasmus program. The Commission suggested a doubling of its budget, but the Erasmus program must be democratic in the member states. This means we know that the scholarships are reduced. We know that the budget is limited and will be limited in the future. Therefore, national governments will have to make an effort to increase the possibilities for all students to benefit from the Erasmus program. There is a considerable number already participating, but participation in the Erasmus program should be further increased. And then we have to talk about the mechanism for connecting Europe. We have to talk about digital Europe, and we're going to hear more about this topic later. And we also should talk about the Invest EU program. We just heard a detailed presentation on Invest EU and the role it can play in the future. But we also have to agree that the Juncker program was a good decision. It produced good results, but it was not ambitious enough. So public investment has to be increased, and we need rules that make sure that there is regional balance, that all countries can benefit from the Invest EU program. We also need there are other programs, the Reform Support Program, the European Semester, and the Investment Stabilization Facility. It's clear from the recent crisis that the national stabilizers are not sufficient, that we need European instruments in order to be able to react to new crises that may happen. But there is this consensus also on a second issue. The consensus is that there is not enough innovation transfer. Ms. Zanova spoke about the results of university research, but a major effort has to be made to make sure that these research results and innovations are transferred to the economy and help to promote and generate added value. We have to overcome this transfer deficit in the field of innovation. In my opinion, this is the added value which the European Innovation Council has to provide. And this is also the added value which InvestEU has to bring for the future. The presidency is proposing 3 lines of discussion. First, promotion of competitiveness in Europe. Second, innovation priorities, strengthening of the scientific leadership of Europe, and finally, the role of credit for enterprises. And again, coming back to the presentation by Ms. Sanova, I think an effort has to be made so that SMEs can benefit from the European Investment Bank. And obtaining credit from the European Investment Bank is one of these possibilities. But there again, we need an effort to be made at national level. Thank you very much, Ms. Marquez. I'd like to thank you all for your statements. So we can enter into our debate. Again, speaking time is 3 minutes. Nikos Tornaritis is the first speaker.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Dear friends, dear colleagues, undeniably, research, innovation, and education are the major drivers for economic growth, prosperity, and sustainable development. Horizon Europe promises to contribute for strengthening the scientific and technological basis, increasing the competitiveness, tackling the most important global challenges, as well as for ensuring the sustainable development of the European Union. The Commission's proposition to increase European Union funding to 100 billion over the years 2021-2027 is a positive step forward, but it needs more resources to bridge the current investment gap and promote inclusiveness in the European Union. Cyprus welcomed the Commission's proposal for the better use of synergies between the 9th European Union Framework Programme and the other relevant European Union programmes and financing instruments, thereby reducing overlaps, simplifying access, and reducing bureaucracy. To this end, it is of paramount significance the state aid rules to be reviewed in order to become more innovation-friendly and to foster such synergies. As a country that recognizes the significance of the next European Union Framework Programme, we call for an active role of the Member States in the strategic planning process as well as in the implementation of the future programme. It is extremely important the principle of excellence, the focus on transnationality, and a clear European Union added value to continue to be the core guiding principles in the next programme. It is also significant the next programme to be simpler and better structured than the current one. Research investments invest in Europe's future. It's time for Europe to shape its future in the new era.
Vielen Dank. Cemal Öztürk has next.
Thank you. Cemal Öztürk is the next speaker.
Thank you. Dear delegations, as you know, Turkey isn't a member of EU yet. but it will be in the future. So today I would like to explain to you the Turkish economy. Turkey is one of the most dynamic economies in the world. In recent years, important steps have been taken in order to increase productive capacity of the economy, expand high-value-added production, and encourage investment. And for rising economies like Turkey, foreign direct investments are especially important. We have a very attractive investment incentive regime. Recently, in late 2016, we put in place a brand new tool called the project-based intensive. Project-based means that each potential investment is regarded as a separate and unique project. Therefore, we identify the suitable support instruments together with the investor based on what he or she wants. It is not a fixed system. It is flexible. It is tailor-made. It is a very powerful tool. We created the powerful tool because we want to help strategic, large-scale investments choose Turkey. With project-based incentive, we target strategic investments. For us, strategic investment means an investment that offers technology, innovation, transformation, research and development, high value added, automation, digitalization, sustainability, efficiency, environmental friendliness. In this way, we hope to get know-how, increase local production of innovative, high technology products, and thus decrease the current account deficit caused by importation of such products. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you.
Baroness Faulkner. Margarida is next, please.
Kishore Baroness Faulkner.
Chairman, and can I say that it is a real pleasure for the United Kingdom to be here once again. Potentially not for very many more years, but it's great to be here today. And can I congratulate the Austrian presidency on a really significant program that we're discussing here today. I know that we have had excellent speeches from the platform. I was particularly impressed by Ms. Sanova's overview of where we are in Europe as compared to other economies. But one of the things that I think that we need to be realistic about in the EU is the sorry condition of financing tech companies, financing innovation, seed financing in startups. While I've been listening to Ms. Sanova, I looked up OECD, and in 2016, venture capital investments in the United States amounted to $66.6 billion US, while in Europe they amounted to $4.7 billion US. That is not a gap that can be closed, Mr. Chairman. And we also know that if one looks at the 10 biggest multinationals now, they're predominantly, of course, tech companies, but we know that emerging markets tech companies, particularly the Chinese, will overtake the Western, so-called Western global firms in the next couple of years. Nobody can compare. We are just unable to compare with the likes of Tencent or Alibaba in China. Alibaba did an IPO, which is described as the world's biggest IPO, raised $25 billion in its first round. It generates millions of jobs. And while what FC is trying to do is extremely valuable, and InvestEU is a great initiative, but I think there has to be more movement at national and subnational level for countries to promote those small seed firms that need the capital and will use them. Uber, one of the biggest tech companies, Airbnb, all of those started out with VC at local level, and only that route has made them the frontier firms they've become. I don't think there's enough of a realization of what needs to be done at a national level, and I hope the national parliamentarians will take that home. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Willy Vähämäki.
In Finland, we have made big study about new innovative technologies. We did find 100 new innovations and applications and 200 new kind of jobs and many laws that we have to change if we want to adapt these innovations in society. We also found 20 fields of economy and value chains that are changing fast. Fastest change happens in logistics, automations of jobs, sustenance and making of foods and goods. But I have to note, almost nothing happens in the field of education innovations. In Finland, we must educate and re-educate 1 million citizens in next decade, and we have only 5.5 million citizens. If the scale is same in whole EU zone, in EU we must educate 90 million citizens in next decade. But how? We must invest now on education innovations. We must find new innovations and adapt them fast to society. EU can't become a low-cost, low-technology zone. Next decade's choices must be done now. Now is good time to invest on new technology and applications. Some examples from our study: AI, deep learning, autonomous logistics, blockchains, my data, biotechnical meat imitations, and IoT. These are new kind of technologies that we need. We also need some new kind of funds so we can give money to and loans to small innovative companies. InvestEU can be a good tool, but we must know what technologies we must invest. That's why in Finland we made this kind of study. We haven't seen anything yet on fields of innovations. Best is yet coming.
Thank you, Thomas Mann. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see that we can provide a couple of results, including the speech we heard in Strasbourg a couple of weeks ago, Jean-Claude Juncker's last speech about the State of the Union. The name Juncker is associated with many things, including the Juncker plan. Mrs. Marquez said that it was not ambitious enough, but from the viewpoint of the member states, it was too ambitious. The leverage effect, 1 to 7, can we manage that? That was criticized. There were so many in the member states who criticized that, who said Europe shouldn't get involved and interfere, but it was the right thing for Europe to get involved. Of course, we had our concerns. We asked ourselves, is that going to end up in the right hands? Real infrastructure measures that create something new is important. I'm glad that so many SMEs got promoted that way, and even the regions that said that they will not be able to participate were not right. We succeeded in this project, and I would appeal to you and to the member states. There are many things we can't do in Europe, but there are things we can. Why not in EFSI? You mentioned Horizon 2020. Let me remind you of Erasmus+. I'm glad that Commissioner Oettinger said that we're not going to cut funding for Erasmus+. On the contrary, we are going to double the budget. This is an important signal sent to students and to people undergoing professional training. So if we want to go into the electoral campaign, we should make it quite clear that Europe has done great things, and I think those European signals are important. It includes EFSI, it includes Horizon 2020 and Erasmus+. Those are things we can really be proud of. Thank you, Clayton Bartolo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, allow me to thank the Austrian presidency for the organization of this conference and for the very good organization with which it has been organized. I think we have all agreed here with a number of these concepts, the fact that investment, innovation and also education, they are, yes, the main drivers to make a more competitive Europe and also to increase competitiveness in each country. Coming from the small island of Malta, I have to note the fact that there is a trend in Malta's debt to GDP ratio, which has been going downwards, and we have also experienced economic growth of 4 to 6% for the past 4 years now, something which has become also sustainable. However, in spite of such very good economic growth rates, as a country we have not stopped working, and so we are looking to adapt our education system in order to meet new challenges and opportunities arising out of the current technological innovations. In fact, we are also aiming to be the front runner in the take-up of such new technologies and emerging financial services. And here I am referring to the blockchain technologies and also related cryptocurrencies. In fact, in July, the Maltese Parliament has enacted a set of new laws on this new sector. And as a country, we hope that these laws will attract foreign financial tech companies to establish themselves in the country. Amongst others, these new acts set up the Malta Digital Innovation Authority and also establish the principles for the development of visions, skills, and other qualities relating to technological innovation, and also the exercise of regulatory functions regarding innovative technologies. Furthermore, 3 educational institutions, which are the Malta College for Art, Science and Technology, the Institute for Tourism Studies, and also the National Commission for Further and Higher Education, will be the first to grant certification for professional and informal education. We are also wary that there are certain security implications in these new and innovative technologies. And so, yes, we are taking the necessary measures to ensure that blockchain legislation is also tough on money laundering. We are also leading the way through a €300,000 scholarship fund for students furthering their studies in blockchain and distributed ledger technologies at master's and PhD levels. The government will be fully funding those students who choose this area of study on a full-time or a part-time basis. And so we look forward towards further strengthening our economy and making Malta a leading innovator in financial services. We encourage the EU to continue investing in such innovation and technology, and also to continue increase its investment in education in order to make Europe and its countries more competitive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Uwe Feiler is the next speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, we're discussing investment, innovation, and education as drivers for a competitive Europe. We have the worst crisis since the 1920s behind us. We've got many things going. In 2015, it was EFSI, and today, 3 years later, and after another 100 projects, we can say that it was a success. So it's right to continue EFSI until 2020, and in the debate on the next MFF, we should make investments and investment funding a priority. Another priority is research and development. Founder and startups are going through various phases with their young companies, and they need support. Research promotion for SMEs is another thing which we need to strengthen, because SMEs simply do not have many areas in which research and development can be pursued. Education is the key to the world, and regardless of the priority on research and development, this should be in balance with non-academic training. We're going to need crafts people, electricians, plumbers. Someone will have to build the houses, the buildings where research and development can go on. Therefore, we have to advance the talents of our children at an early age. We have to focus on the dual system of training. Even in countries where it doesn't exist yet, we need mutual recognition in Europe, and then I think we can reach our goal of maintaining the competitiveness of Europe. Thank you very much. Dimitrios Mardos.
Yes. Mr. President, I will focus my presentation on a specific topic, which is, I can say, seated on the periphery of the subject under discussion, and it is referring more precisely to the investment process and implicitly to innovation and to education. Ms. Sanova said that we have to mobilize private sector economy. This means, among others, that we have to leave competition rules to operate following the well-known framework. However, we see in some cases a sui generis trend in favor of selective sectorial interventions which are out of competition rules and, I can say, out of the principles of the EU. More precisely, I am referring to the Directive number 2007/46, and especially to Annex 12. What is the subject of this annex? In this annex, we can see that there is an upper threshold referring to the production of small series cars named N1 cars. The threshold is annually 250 cars. And of course, there are some other thresholds for some other cars. The question is that how such kind of interventions can promote investments in countries which try to develop a dynamic comparative advantage. Dynamic comparative advantage is fully associated to innovation efforts and research efforts. So I think that such kind of interventions implies a distortion in the context of the industrial policy of the EU, and in my opinion, you have to reconsider such kind of interventions. The fact that there is a qualified majority in some cases, this does not mean that everything that we apply are fully compatible to EU principles and generally to competition rules. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jeppe Kofod.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you so much to the panel. I think it's been proven also that the FC, the Fund for Strategic Investment, was very useful. Although some of us wanted a bigger fund because we, as we all know, had a huge lack of investment in all of the important things that we were facing, challenges to our societies, whether it was aging, climate change, digital transformation, our economic and innovation, our research and so on. So we know that we need investment and we need additionality to what the private market can provide. I want to focus on a few things. First of all, it was said before, digitalization is a huge challenge. I agree, and we need to ensure that investment will benefit all people in society. We need an inclusive agenda. And I think not only investing in technology and skills, but also in ethics is also a comment to Niels. I think we are in an early age in our digital transformation in society, but Europe should be the leader, #1 in the world, when it also comes to digital ethics and how we deal with this reality we're going into. On climate change and sustainability, I have to say, I think we missed a big chance over the years. We have still a structural underinvestment in areas like energy efficiency, renewables. I mean, the Juncker Commission promised that Europe should be #1 in renewables. We are not #1 anymore. Other countries have taken over, like China. So we see here a structural deficit. In energy efficiency, the same thing, which is a tool to achieve a sustainable future. It's amazing that we still have underinvestment. Also, EIB, it's proven several times that there's an underinvestment in this field, and I would ask specifically what you can do about this. I mean, just think today in Europe we are importing for more than 300 billion euro a year energy from abroad, from Russia, from the Gulf, and so on, that we can produce ourselves, and we can also be much more efficient. And we can be the innovative hub of energy efficiency, renewables, and intelligent energy systems. So there's a lot to do in this matter. And finally, it was mentioned in the previous discussion, we still have 8% unemployment rate in Europe. And therefore, we need to develop also, in a way, a social model that will include everybody. And I think investment into that field is important, because if not, we will see people turning their backs to institutions, to politics, and to society. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Harry Raskari.
Mr. President, thank you for very interesting discussion. I'd like to think about or talk about that where the startups would like to, let's say, start their business, and where are the companies where what really like to grow. I think it's rather a local and regional issue than national or EU or US issue. Like Mr. Torvalds said about that, 70% of investments are going to California. And it is the same thing also in Europe. There are certain very interesting spots in Europe at the moment. And it is actually a combination of very top universities, very skilled people, very interesting innovators, also people who are able to take risks, and very demanding customers and like this. So it's a combination of different kind of group of people. So should we think about more at the local level? Should we think about more in there where everything starts? And the second round is then that should we have in Europe a common corporate taxation? Should we have also very competitive taxations for the owners? Because yes, that is the case. When they start to grow up, then they are looking for the big markets, and then they are going to US. But if you talk about the business, then they are saying that we would like to get a very stable business environment, and they really want to forecast the future, that now if we do this kind of investment, we should have a certain very stable business environment. And the third point is actually that what is the role of the public money and the private money? Should we promote more private money to come to the companies and rather than to, let's say, some housing or infrastructure? Really, they would like to come to the companies which are willing to grow and which create employment. What kind of environment we will have in there? And finally, for example, in Finland, then we put about 2 billion euros per year to innovation. But public sector is putting about 35 billion to public purchasing. What is the role of this big money related to innovation? That might be a big question, because there is a real big money. What could be do something better than what we are doing at the moment?
Thank you. Christophe Girit.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a very interesting and efficient debate. I'd like to speak about three things. The European Union and the members of Parliament are very interested in the triptych, namely research, digitalization, which is going to have an impact on industry, and through those elements also the section education and vocational and non-vocational education. So this triplet is very necessary for our future programs, because all three are indispensably interlinked, and they are very much linked to economic competitiveness. So the policy of research transposed into industrial application, again, translated into education. Those are the three main elements and the three factors in order to develop economic competitiveness. And another factor is important: coordination of public policies on innovation and research and the public policy of the EU. We have to have coordination and balance between the two. Those two elements, the financial elements and on research itself. And interaction between the budgetary actions of the EU and of its member states on innovation and research have to be much more coordinated and more efficient and have to add more value. And the third point, that is maybe a little more philosophical. It is important the acceptability of those two elements of failure and success. If one is engaged in research and innovation, sometimes you are successful, sometimes you fail. And I think it is necessary today, and I'm very convinced of it, that the states and that the governments, parliaments, and investment funds and banks have to be aware that in order to make progress, there has to be some failure. They have success as well, but failure sometimes leads to success. I think in the future is ours if we allow research and innovation to take us there. Thank you. Thank you, Julian Janko.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dear panelists, dear colleagues, we have only a few seconds, so please let me direct and honest and very I will also want to be provocative for any of you. It's a huge chance to be here and to have this kind of approach. I am trying to understand what is happening with us, what is wrong with us, why we are speaking in a dual language. We have a double language. We are speaking, trying to understand that we will have a common program for investments and competitivity, or we are speaking only for the champions, for the big players. Because if we are speaking for any member states, we have to understand why we are speaking something and we are doing vice versa. And let me tell you one example. Competitivity, it's crucial for all of us, for Europe, like a main worldwide exporter, which is affecting competitivity. Mineral resources and energy. On energy, we are importing 56 from our gas, 84 from our oil, 94 from our uranium, 67 from our coal. And we are paying 1.13 billion per day, the most expensive bill and it's affecting our economy daily. And we are saying we have to have interconnections from north to south, east to west, and to interconnect and to create a unique market and to have a best price. What is happening in reality? We are saying we have to interconnect Black Sea with West Europe, and we have a new pipeline, which we call BRUA. From 4 countries, only 1 is investing, Romania. Second, we are saying we have to merge the markets. Romania, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, we have a unique market, and we have to merge with Austria, Germany, France, but they refused to do this. From 2 years ago, how we could have a chance for price, for a cheapest price, to save and to help our economy. We have 2 billion of copper on our country. We have 750 million of gold and silver. We have zirconium, titanium, wolfram. Europe is importing 176 million of tons for mineral resources. And we have on our surface at the European level, but we are not investing on. We don't have priorities on our interconnections to interconnect Baltic areas, Spain and Portugal. So how we could use this money? You are saying that we have 186, if I understood, additional money for investment in energy. I will close. But 186 from where capacities, from where technology, from where human resources? So we have to have a unique approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Evgenia Angelova.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I would like to say that putting priority on research and innovation, of course, properly backed with increased budget, is one of the main preconditions for strengthening the European Union and its position and performance in the sector. Bulgaria welcomes the efforts made by the European Commission to present a proposal for a modern, streamlined and future-oriented budget for the next financial period. Of course, respecting all European Union policy priorities and balancing the scarce resources among the different policy areas. We also appreciate that the Commission, building on the success of the current programs, proposes a variety of programs and funds aiming to boost European Union competitiveness, especially for the policies directly linked to the European Union competitiveness, innovation, research, and the single market. The Commission there plans significant increases. However, my main point here is that we would like to strongly emphasize the need to put more efforts towards addressing the geographical balance and the capacity building. Just like Madame Marquez said, we need regional balance, and this is something which is extremely important. In general, we consider that the Commission MFF proposal is a good basis setting for the European Union competitiveness among the top priorities in the 21-27 period. And once again, I want to thank you for having us here. You've been a great host, and we've really much enjoyed this conference.
Thank you. Yanis Vukans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, all those things mentioned by the first speaker of this section, Madame Ilyana Tsanova, the various aspects of innovation, research, investments in research infrastructure, development of national innovation system, commercialization, inclusion of basic elements of entrepreneurship in education programs of various levels, all this for at least last 15 years is under the very deep concern of my country, of governments and parliament of my country, Latvia. As you all know, this is a very complex set of problems, but one of the main purposes of that is the rise of productivity. The insufficient level of productivity is one of the main economic problems, not only in Latvia, but also in some other countries of the European Union. In the countries which would like to get closer to the EU average productivity level and consequently also to the EU average welfare level. The specifics of Latvia currently is that now during the period of quite high economic growth, when level of unemployment is quite low, but additionally the tendency of economic emigration from our country is not fully stopped, the pressure to rise up the salaries in private as well in public sector is quite big. In such situations, some additional instruments from the EU central funds with definite orientation to solve the specific task to stimulate the rising of productivity is highly supportable. But I ask, building up the new programs, which will continue the Horizon 2020 program, take into account those specific aspects about which I talk, differences of EU countries. As it was mentioned also in some other speeches in this section. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This means we have exhausted the list of speakers, and I may now ask our three panelists to respond or to share their final conclusions. Mrs. Marques. Micro. Thank you, Chair. There are 5 points I'd like to talk about. The first, to remind you of the fact that there are speakers who underlined the triplet: education, innovation, and investment. I think it was very good of the presidency to choose this title, and I think to remember that those three realities, education, innovation, and investment, need to live together. Second point, the link between Horizon Europe and InvestEU. Someone said that we had to reduce the overlaps. Yes, I agree. Overlaps have to be eliminated, and I think there is one thing that is even more important, that is complementarity between the two. That is to say, if we talk about innovation in the framework of 2020, Invest Europe has to be the instrument in order to promote investments and to promote the economic capacity to integrate the innovations generated by Horizon Europe. And secondly, then, by the way, your Minister of Digital and Economic Affairs, the minister talked about one of the priorities of the presidency, that it was to promote the industry and a new industrial policy for Europe. So both the industrial policy and the digital policies, if we want to be successful, we have to invest in education and in innovation. Another issue is linked to the single market. A key element in development is the deepening, and in the deepening of the single market is the mobility of persons. Some speakers have somehow raised this issue, for instance, the mutual recognition of diplomas, but beyond that, there is also the fostering of the mobility in education, mobility in digitalization, and in issues linked to business undertakings. So, in conclusion, several speakers compared Europe with China, the US, risk capital, shares, social rights and other issues. So really have to understand the diversity of realities. But it is quite obvious that the only way for the member states of the European Union to react well and to be better positioned in the global context, that is to go together and be united, to be a real European Union and to deepen the European Union. In my mind, this can help us to respond to issues of diversity. We are better prepared if we go together as the European Union to react to the divergence of situations in the world and to react to the issues and the challenges of globalization. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Torvalds.
Vielen Dank. Well, I go back to one of the issues I've been thinking of since, well, 2004 at least. I was the correspondent of the Finnish television in Washington from 2001 to 2004. 2004, not a very well written, but an interesting book was published in the US market. What's the Matter with Kansas was the name of the book. And what they actually did in this book was to describe how the political landscape in Kansas all of a sudden changed from having a sort of a traditional working class voting for the Democrats, being a backlash working class voting for the Republicans. So if you go back in history, if you need to know why they voted for Donald Trump, then Kansas is sort of the blueprint for this development. So what's the lesson for us? We have to take care and be in the forefront. We can't sort of leave investments and innovations and education to, well, whatever, or to the free forces of any market. That would lead us to the stop station, the end station of Kansas. But at the same time, we can't leave the back country in the same position as they are left in the US. If we are leaving the back countries of all the member states to their own devices, this union will be divided. Because at some certain point, we will have a majority which feel themselves left on the back burner. So therefore, we have to find solutions to be at the forefront in technology, and we have to look for the back countries that they stay in the competition. And we can't do it without money. And education is here sort of paramount. Sometimes ironic comments about the United States of America says that the 11th wonder of the world is how the worst educational system can produce the best universities. So we have to be able to keep the standard of education in all the countries. And we have to be able to build structures helping those back countries to keep up with what's going on in technology. There is no other solution. So I'm sure everybody understands that this is not easy to do, but we are the only one who can do it. That's sort of the lesson of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Sanova.
Well, thank you very much for interesting feedback. And I must say I'm pleased that most of you appreciate what has been achieved by EFSI. And I hear what you're saying. And I see that there is a debate that you were not ambitious enough, this was too small or too big. I mean, there are a number of comments that were also said in the past. But I think that's not really the important point. The important point is that EFSI changed the way public finance is used, for good, by the way. The public finance using for catalyzing investment, for mobilizing private sector funding, and that will leave a longer-term legacy for the EU economy. And I'm really pleased that now we have InvestEU, which basically merges 14 existing financial instruments into one big-scale, big-impact instrument with 4 policy priorities. I think this is the way to go. It's up to you to fine-tune the machine, how you will set the policy priorities, the instruments. We are there to help. But I think that's the direction. Well, what's the role of public and private money? I think we shall realize the fact that when we look at the MFF, that's not enough for us to achieve the ambitious targets we have set for ourselves and our continent. Unless we manage to attract private sector financing, we will not be able to achieve what we want to achieve. And using the public funding to de-risk investments, to risk share with the private sector, to bring them along, to work together on strategies is absolutely important, especially when we talk about innovation and technology development, because let's not forget that it's mostly driven by the private sector. We do our work at universities, but what we actually see impacting our lives on a daily basis comes from the private sector. Young companies that grow really fast, and we as policymakers are really, I would say, challenged to catch up with the pace of technological development and respond with what the market needs. And I think that will be the challenge we will be facing in the future. We need to adapt very quickly to something which is pretty fast. Talking about regional local development of those companies, I mean, if I look at the portfolio of EFSI and where the R&D investments are focused, what I could see, and everyone could see, is that those investments are mostly in countries which have more vibrant economies, that are industrially more developed, that have better universities, that have, I would say, more developed capital markets. And what we see is an issue where we do invest in research and development, but if you look at EU, the member states, the investment is not homogeneous, and we are facing the risk where some countries lag behind other countries, and we need to address that. And if we're talking about this, do we really want to have local development? Yes, I see your point, but the fact is that Europe is competing for talent, scientists, all kinds of investors globally. And we don't have the capacity to build those ecosystems locally. I think we need to look at developing few regional Silicon Valleys in Europe where we can combine the best what we have in those regions, because these ecosystems are super important. The companies need to be close to universities. Those small companies need to be close to the business angels. They need to be close to the financiers and the investors because they cooperate on a daily basis, especially when they're young. That is why my response would be, let's look at developing few Silicon Valleys in Europe which are based regionally rather than individual small centers. Interesting topic, and I'm sorry we don't have the time to talk more, but I remain open. You have my email, so if you have any questions, please feel free to call. Thank you very much again to the Austrian presidency. It has been a fantastic event, and good luck. Thanks.
Vielen herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much to you, Sanova, Mrs. Marques, and Mr. Torvalds. And I would like to thank you all for your contributions to the discussion. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when putting together the agenda for this conference, mid-term financial framework was, of course, important. And it was a great concern to put a focus on the aggressive measures. And this is why investment, education and innovation has been chosen as the title of this session. And in view of the debate that we've just seen, I guess the exercise has been successful, thanks to you all and to you here on the panel. So thank you very much for that.